You are the royal physician of Madrid. The year is 1834. King Ferdinand VII is dead. But your work isn't over. The Queen Regent, Maria Cristina, stands before you. Grief etched into her face, her hands clenched tightly in front of her. You've been summoned to the private chambers of the late king, not to confirm death, not to prepare for embalming, but to preserve one specific part of him. And as the guards open the doors to the royal bedchamber, the air turns cold. The silk-draped corpse lies before you, still and pale, yet not at peace. His face is rigid, jaw locked as if resisting death itself. But your eyes are drawn lower, beneath the sheets. That's where the true legacy lies. The one no history book would ever name. The part of Ferdinand VII that defined not only his reign, but also his destruction. What lies under those linens is the reason you're here. A grotesquely misshapen, abnormally large member, an anatomical anomaly whispered about for decades in palace corridors. Its size, its curvature, its alien texture. It became both a royal symbol and a private curse. This is what you've been asked to preserve. For science, for posterity, for power. As you ready the instruments, your mind drifts to what you've heard. Rumors of screaming wives, broken beds, physicians paid to design mechanisms that allowed a man deformed by nature to function as a king. But those rumors are more than gossip. You've read the private case notes. You know what this deformity did to him, to his mind, to his rule. Ferdinand VII was born into decay, not a metaphorical one. His blood was a cocktail of centuries-long inbreeding. Cousins married cousins, siblings twisted into lineage charts that looked more like circles. The Habsburg and Bourbon lines had long abandoned biological reason. And what emerged on October 14, 1784, was a boy doomed before he could speak. By age 13, the palace doctors were already alarmed. His genital development defied medical understanding. Reports hidden in the Vatican archives described it clinically, but the horror is clear between the lines. His Royal Highness presents with an organ of such dimensions and irregular morphology that conventional intercourse may be physically harmful to any female partner. Another note from a French envoy was more direct. It is shaped like a malformed club, thin at the root, grotesquely engorged at the tip, twisted in curvature. No woman will endure it without aid. Perhaps not even then. Ferdinand's adolescence was humiliation disguised as privilege. Servants giggled. Diplomats wrote reports that disguised medical observation as scandal. The court called him El Engendro, the freak. He grew up learning that his most private self, the part that defined manhood, was not a strength but a joke, a punishment. And with that realization came bitterness, a rot that spread into his soul. He began to see mockery where there was only decorum. He distrusted the bowed heads of ministers. He resented the whispering nobility. Even his tutors sensed a shift. What began as shyness curdled into cruelty. One page, just a boy, caught a glimpse of the prince disrobing after a riding lesson. Ferdinand had him flogged and banished his family from Madrid. The message was simple. No one could see what he hid, not without consequence. When it came time to marry, Ferdinand's affliction was already a secret of state. Physicians engineered elaborate cushions, restraints, ointments. Artisans designed devices the public would never see. It was not marriage that was being prepared for, it was battle. And in 1802, battle came, disguised as a wedding. Princess Maria Antonia of Naples and Sicily, his cousin and political match, arrived in Madrid full of naive hopes. She imagined love. Instead, she found horror. Their wedding night was a carefully choreographed ritual. Ointments warmed, cushions positioned, valets instructed. Maria Antonia, sheltered by religious education and groomed for royalty, had no idea what was coming. She screamed when she saw him. The staff had to intervene to calm her. Laudanum was administered, but the reality could not be erased. Ferdinand's condition was no myth. It was worse than anyone had warned. Her words, recorded years later by a lady-in-waiting, were a whisper of trauma. It was a punishment, not a man. The royal physicians approached the situation like a surgical procedure. They had prepared, they had rehearsed. But nothing could truly prepare anyone for the grotesque theater that unfolded behind the gilded doors of the bridal suite. Maria Antonia was drugged, but conscious, her breathing shallow, her pupils dilated. They placed her on the specially constructed platform, angled for minimal impact, designed to support the king's weight and mitigate injury. Her wedding night was not one of intimacy. It was one of endurance. The act itself was described in a secret letter, later intercepted by the French ambassador. It required not only mechanical intervention, but restraint. The Queen's body was not suited to receive the royal burden. The injuries sustained were not insignificant. Afterward, she was carried from the room, her face pale, her legs trembling. Ferdinand said nothing. He merely requested that the chamber be cleaned. From that night forward, their marriage became ritualized. Each attempt at conception was scheduled like an execution. The Queen would be sedated. The aides would be prepared. The guards would be posted. Ferdinand entered, then exited, and silence returned. As months passed and no heir was conceived, pressure mounted. The court whispered. The king obsessed. He doubled his intake of aphrodisiacs, ground rhinoceros horn, powdered coral, roots imported from Asia and Africa. He demanded new designs for intimacy apparatus, leather and silk restraints, imported oils, velvet-lined wedges. The artisans of Madrid became the secret architects of one man's biological nightmare. Yet nothing worked. Twice Maria Antonia conceived, twice she miscarried. The first miscarriage came early, 4 months in. The Queen collapsed during Mass. Blood soaked her gown. Court doctors claimed it was exhaustion. But private reports speak of internal tearing, complications from repeated trauma during intercourse. Ferdinand didn't mourn. He blamed. He accused his wife of sabotage, said she rejected God's will, that she wanted a republic, not a dynasty, that her body conspired against Spain. And when she became pregnant a second time, his behavior became even more erratic. He summoned astrologers to read her womb. He demanded she remain confined to a single room, exposed only to pure influences. No foreign linens, no books, no contact with the outside world. The child died weeks before term. Maria Antonia nearly died with it. Her recovery was slow, her addiction to laudanum deepened. She would whisper in the halls at night, prayers, apologies, half-finished hymns. She wrote letters to dead saints, asking forgiveness for sins she couldn't name. The king began sleeping elsewhere. He claimed her presence weakened his essence. When she wept during dinner, he ordered the musicians to play louder. When she vomited during Mass, he said it was a demon. When she bled again, he ordered a new mattress, so the stains wouldn't mar his memory of the occasion. By the spring of 1807, she was a ghost in silk. Her death came in May. The official cause, fever, complications from her delicate constitution. Unofficially, the court knew better. She died of collapse, of being slowly unmade, of being used until the part of her that was woman and not queen ceased to exist. Ferdinand wore black for a week. Then he commissioned a new bed. Maria Antonia's death didn't temper Ferdinand, it unshackled him. The Queen was gone, and with her the one person who had witnessed, endured, the full truth of his condition. In her absence, the king's court became a private laboratory for obsession. Fertility, potency, control, these were no longer goals, they were compulsions. Within weeks, Ferdinand began consulting mystics. One was a self-declared prophet from the Pyrenees who claimed his deformity was divine, the dragon's mark. Another, a Turkish apothecary exiled from Naples, promised a potion that would concentrate his masculine energies. These men entered the palace under nightfall and left quietly with purses full of gold. None of them returned, but the rituals they introduced lingered. The king adopted a regimen of chants, incense, fasting, and copulation timed with lunar phases. He ate no meat on odd-numbered days. He only wore white when entering the royal chambers. He refused to sleep unless his sheets were sown with rosemary and rue. His body, already misshapen, began to deteriorate further. Gout inflamed his joints, his skin turned blotchy, he sweated excessively, but he remained fixated on virility. In 1816, he remarried, this time to Maria Isabel of Portugal, his teenage niece. The court had changed by then, new ministers, new servants, but the routine remained the same: wedding, ceremony, drugs, pillows, screams. Maria Isabel lasted 3 years. She gave birth once to a daughter who died within hours. The Queen herself died soon after. Official cause: miscarriage. Again, Ferdinand's grief was theatrical. He accused the midwives of sabotage, the nurses of poison. He ordered one of the court physicians imprisoned in the basement of the Escorial for incompetence in the face of royal need. He then secluded himself for 40 days, during which he demanded daily enemas of saffron wine and dove's milk, believing it would purify the seed line. The following year, he married again, this time to Maria Josepha Amalia of Saxony. She was 17, deeply religious, untouched by scandal. For a time, the court hoped she might be spared. She was not. On their wedding night, Maria Josepha reportedly fainted at the first sight of the king undressed. She awoke in a haze of incense, surrounded by physicians and aides. One letter from a German diplomat described the horror. The girl was strapped down like an animal. There was no consent, only ceremony. Her screams were heard through 3 walls. After that night, she refused to see Ferdinand. She locked herself in the palace chapel. She wrote to the Pope, begging for annulment. None came. Ferdinand did not press further. He believed that her spiritual sickness had tainted her womb. He turned again to his alchemists and his mistresses. Palace records suggest at least 3 chambermaids became pregnant during this time. None of the pregnancies reached term. 2 ended in miscarriage. 1, according to rumors, in a stillbirth so deformed that the body was burned before dawn. The child had no name, no funeral, only silence. By the 1820s, the monarchy itself had begun to mirror the man who ruled it. Bloated, erratic, unstable, Ferdinand's paranoia deepened alongside his physiological decline. He trusted no one, saw betrayal in every whisper, every glance. Ministers were dismissed for imagined slights. Servants were whipped for failing to avert their eyes. And still, he could not produce an heir, not one that lived. In 1829, at the age of 45, he married for the 4th and final time, Maria Cristina of the 2 Sicilies, barely 23 years old, raised for diplomacy, not survival. She entered the marriage with a clear directive from her handlers: bear a child, secure the throne, tolerate the rest. She succeeded, at a cost. Ferdinand had aged grotesquely by then, his body swollen with fluid, skin covered in lesions, breath sour with disease. His deformity had worsened, warped further by inflammation and decades of friction and force. Medical notes from the palace, coded in Greek and Latin, describe necrotic folds, tissue ulceration, and evidence of circulatory strain. And yet the rituals continued. The same cushions, the same oils, the same restrained ceremony. This time, Maria Christina was compliant. She had learned from the others. She survived, she conceived. And in October 1830, she gave birth to a daughter, Isabella. The court erupted, bells rang, decrees were issued. But beneath the celebration, a crisis loomed. Spain had no precedent for a reigning queen. The Salic law, inherited from the French Bourbons, forbade female succession. Ferdinand, with no male heir, faced civil instability once more. So he changed the law. By decree, he allowed his daughter to inherit the throne. His brothers, especially Don Carlos, saw it as treason. Thus began the slow unraveling of Spanish monarchy, the Carlist Wars, the fragmentation of royal loyalty, the rise of liberal factions. Ferdinand's body failed before his politics did. His final months were consumed by rot. He developed gangrene in his legs. He could no longer walk. His deformity, once his twisted symbol of pride, had turned septic. Physicians pleaded for amputation. He refused. His final nights were spent screaming, not in pain, in rage, at his daughter, at his wife, at God. He accused them all of betrayal. When he died in 1833, his final breath was not a whisper, but a curse, against his own blood, his own name. And when they lifted the sheets to begin the embalming, even the physician flinched. The body was failing, but the legacy of that deformity would live longer than flesh. The embalming was delayed. Ferdinand's body, bloated with fluid and infection, had already begun to turn. But it wasn't decomposition that caused hesitation. It was the decision. What to preserve? The heart, the brain, the face. These were traditional, ceremonial. But the Queen Regent had given a different instruction. The deformity, the symbol, that grotesque legacy that had ruled the palace as much as any law or crown. You, the royal physician, stood before it, hands trembling, tools prepared. The chamber was silent, curtains drawn, only 2 assistants present. Outside, the court speculated on succession, civil war, and foreign intervention. Inside, you focused on flesh. The extraction was not simple. The tissue had necrotized at the base. Veins had ruptured. There were signs of scar tissue layered upon scar tissue, the result of decades of friction, trauma, strain. What had once been described in hushed tones as an unnatural weapon of virility now resembled a thing half human, half monster. You preserved it in a custom vial, lined with gold, sealed with wax, labeled not by name but by a mark. It was to be stored with the other royal relics, hidden, catalogued, forgotten, but not destroyed, never destroyed. Because Spain, deep down, understood what had ruled it. Not just a man, a mutation, a symbol of indulgence mistaken for strength, of inheritance over sanity, of pain inflicted in the name of tradition. Ferdinand VII had ruled not in spite of his deformity, but because of it. It had twisted his mind, shaped his rage, driven his marriages, and scarred every woman who dared stand beside him. His reign was not a period of governance, it was a symptom. When you finished the procedure, the Queen Regent entered. She didn't speak. She only looked at the sealed vial in your hands. Then she nodded once, turned, and left. You never saw it again. But in the decades that followed, you would hear whispers. Among diplomats, among the clergy, among historians who dared not publish. Whispers of the jar, of the flesh that lived longer in glass than it had in life, of the thing that had ruled Spain. A deformity, yes, but also a mirror, a reflection of a dynasty that by the end had devoured itself. And as Spain descended into wars, revolutions, and fractured identities, the legend of Ferdinand's grotesque secret became more than scandal. It became prophecy. A body too malformed to love, a king too broken to rule, and a nation that mistook both for destiny.